Black Lives Matter. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Well, our country's been thrown into turmoil by the terrible killing on May 25th of George Floyd by the Minneapolis police. And there have been racial protests and questions about injustice in the criminal court systems and et cetera, et cetera. And all these protests have drawn us back to the title, Black Lives Matter. Black lives do matter. Matter of fact, here's a headline that you've never heard anywhere, and I want you to think about why you've never heard it. Here's the headline. 1/3 of U.S. blacks have been killed by the Democrat policy of abortion. That's the end of the headline. Let me read it for you again. 1/3 of U.S. blacks have been killed by the Democratic policy of abortion. That's the end of the headline. Let's study this a little bit. So George Floyd was the death of one man on May 25th. 20 million black babies have been killed by abortion since Roe v. Wade in 1973. This proves Joseph Stalin correct. One death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths is a statistic. The death of George Floyd was a tragedy. The death of 20 million black babies by abortion has become a statistic. Or to quote an economist named Frederick Bastiat, he says, "You see what you see, but you don't see what you don't see." To interpret Bastiat's thinking on this, you have seen the death of George Floyd, which was terrible and tragic and cataclysmic. You have not seen the abortion of a black baby. Get it? So we're affected by what we see, but not by what we don't see. And my broadcast today is trying to get you to think about, if Black Lives Matter, why do we continue abortion? Look, back to this headline. 1/3 of U.S. blacks killed by the Democrat policy of abortion. Let's break that down a little bit. Let's figure out what 1/3 means. Well, it's a common figure that 62 million abortions have happened since Roe v. Wade in 1973. Let's round that down to 60 million to make our math easy. It is also a well-known fact that 36% of abortions happen to black women. Let's round that down to 33 to make the math simple. 1/3 or 33% of 60 million is 20 million. 20 million black babies have been killed by abortion. Okay? Currently in the United States, there are 42.5 million blacks who are alive. Let's round that down to 40 million to make our math simple. 40 million blacks alive, 20 million dead. That's 60 million. 20 million is 1/3 of 60 million. 1/3 of U.S. blacks have been killed by a Democratic policy of abortion. Now, let's determine whether it is a Democrat policy. Well, first, the interesting question is, in the last two presidential elections, 95% and then 90% of blacks voted for a pro-death Democratic president in those last two elections. This would make Charles Darwin turn his head sideways and question, why would people vote for the extermination of their own race? This doesn't quite make sense. Why do they do this? Good question. Well, is it a Democrat policy? Well, clearly it is. Democratic National Committee Chairman Tom Perez in April 2017 had favored a candidate who was pro-life for the Omaha mayoral race. Then his constituency jumped all over his case, and he changed his mind. And he said in April of 2017, there is no room in the Democrat Party for pro-life candidates. This was further reinforced in the recent presidential primary election, when Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg both said exactly the same thing. There is no room in the Democrat Party for pro-life candidates. One, however, remains. So if you're a Christian and you want to vote for pro-life, you want to vote against abortion, you can vote if you're in the district in Illinois and the congressional seat is occupied by one person, Dan Lipinski. Henry Cuellar of Texas has more of a mixed abortion record than Lipinski, and he may claim that he's pro-life, but if he's being honest, even Henry Cuellar would say, I am no Dan Lipinski. There is one left. Dan Lipinski of Illinois is the only Democrat serving in Congress or the Senate who is pro-life. In the last election 2 years ago, the Democrats primaried him because they want him out of their party so badly. Are you realizing what I'm saying? The Democrats tried to displace one of their own long-standing congressional candidates. Why? Because he's pro-life. And they may get him this time. Yeah. So the question is, why do we allow this to happen in our country? If Black Lives Matter, why is there so much focus on the tragic death of George Floyd, but not on the 20 million deaths of Black Americans who had died by abortion? Look, even in Dallas, we had this really strange billboard about 18 months ago. Nice big billboard here in Dallas. Pictures of 3 Black women of reproductive age smiling and seeming happy. And the headline said on the poster, "Abortion is family care." Abortion is family care. I mean, this almost takes me back to 1984 and George Orwell, talk speak. How can abortion be family care? At one point you think, well, this poster must be some kind of a really bad taste Saturday Night Live joke. I mean, this can't be real. Who would pay money to put up that sign? But they really did. It is quite clear Planned Parenthood targets the Black population. That is just beyond question. That is an absolute fact. Okay? Margaret Sanger was the founder of what became Planned Parenthood. She spoke at a KKK meeting in Silver Lake, New Jersey in 1926. There's some debate about this and what happened. And in an online discussion with one of my students one time, my student said, you need to read what Margaret Sanger wrote, not what people wrote about her. And I thought that was really good advice. And so I did. So I went back and looked up some of the writings of Margaret Sanger. It is a fact that she spoke at one Ku Klux Klan meeting in 1926 in Silver Lake, New Jersey. Nobody knows what she said that night. She reports that she didn't enjoy it very much. She thought the people were a little bit strange. She was tied up because of the secrecy of the meeting and couldn't get a bus back into New York City and had to spend the night in New Jersey. She did not speak at another KKK meeting. But if you read Margaret Sanger, here's what she says. This is not me, and this is not me quoting somebody else quoting. This is what Margaret Sanger wrote, that after that meeting, she was invited to speak at other KKK meetings because of what she said that night. Okay, think about it. In 1926, what would you say at a Ku Klux Klan meeting that would get you invited to other Ku Klux Klan meetings? That was Margaret Sanger, the founder of what became Planned Parenthood. And their highest award is called the Margaret Sanger Award. Hillary Clinton proudly stood on a stage and received the Margaret Sanger Award. And she said of the former KKK member and Democratic senator, by the way, I've changed subjects on you too quick. That was Hillary Clinton receiving the award. Now let's go on to what else Hillary Clinton has said. In my lifetime, there's been one former Klan member who served in the U.S. Senate. His name was Robert Byrd. He was from West Virginia. He was in the Klan in his 20s and 30s, rising to the level of Kleagle, whatever that means, an exalted cyclops of his local chapter. This is Robert Byrd, sometimes called KKK Byrd, right? Hillary Clinton said of him, quote, "He was my friend and mentor," end quote. This is a woman who led the Democratic Party during the last election, and she publicly said of a KKK member, "He was my friend and mentor," which makes you wonder, what did he mentor her about? And I want you to think, what kind of public uproar would there be if President Donald Trump stood on a stage and received the Margaret Sanger Award, named for a woman who spoke at a KKK meeting and was invited back? What would be said of Donald Trump saying of Robert Byrd, a former KKK exalted cyclops, whatever that means, "He was my friend and mentor"? But Hillary Clinton did both of those things. Why? Because the Democrat Party favors death. They are a pro-death party. Back to Byrd just for 30 more seconds. He led a filibuster against the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He opposed the Voting Rights Act of 1965, as well as most of the anti-poverty programs of President Lyndon Johnson's Great Society Initiative. That's Robert Byrd, of whom Hillary Clinton said he was my friend and mentor. Again, this makes you wonder, are we in the 1984 world of George Orwell, where he uses this term, talk, speak, meaning you say one thing and mean exactly another? And that's exactly true of Planned Parenthood. Think about the title Planned Parenthood. If you planned, you wouldn't be pregnant and you wouldn't be there. If you wanted to be a parent, you wouldn't be there. So what's called Planned Parenthood is unplanned unparenthood. It's exactly opposite of its title. I used to teach with this guy named Ron Smiles, really great, smart guy. His point was, listen, I could be a one-issue voter and it would be abortion. Because after life, what is there? I mean, you got to think about it. Every time you hear a promise from a Democrat politician, it should be preceded by, after we kill 1/3 of the U.S. black population. Then you can fill in the blank with, you will get free education. After we kill 1/3 of the U.S. black population, then you can fill in the blank with, we'll have better highways, we'll have better whatever. Did you thought about this? What happens after 20 million black babies are aborted? A policy that is supported by the Democrat Party and clearly not supported by the Republican Party. Look, there's never been a greater split in the parties until 2020. Now it is absolutely clear. The Republicans are pro-life. The Democrats are pro-death. There's no question about this. This is not an opinion. It's a fact. George Friedman, in his book, The Storm Before the Calm, wrote that there are two unrepented sins of America. Number one, taking land from the Indians, and number two, slavery. I would like to ask George Friedman, killing 1/3 of a minority via abortion is not a sin. Really? That's astounding to me. Killing 1/3 of the minority is not an unrepented sin. It would certainly seem to be to me, right? So you need to ask your friends who vote Democrat, what scripture supports abortion? And secondly, if Black Lives Matter, which they do, what scripture would support killing 20% of a minority? Now, you may be wondering, why is it 2020 and I've never heard this before? You're probably saying, I've been attending church all my life. Why hasn't my pastor told me this? Why hasn't my pastor stood in the pulpit and said, Democrats favor killing 20 million black babies, that's 1/3 of the current U.S. black population. Republicans disfavor killing 1/3 of the black population. If you are for abortion, vote for Democrats. If you're against abortion, vote Republican. Why have you not been told this? Well, here's one pretty good guess. It's because they would lose their tax-exempt status. In quotation marks, they're all wimps. If your pastor has not mentioned this from the pulpit, he or she is a wimp because they're more concerned about keeping their congregation together and not getting Democrats or Republicans mad at them than they are saving the lives of 20 million black babies. Ask your pastor next Sunday, Pastor, why don't you tell us the truth from the pulpit? Why don't you tell us the truth about my Democrat vote supporting the death of 20 million black babies? See what your pastor says. I think that's his or her answer. A guy named Joel Ryan, writing Christianity.com, was talking about another issue, but he really makes a good point there. He says, quote, in the Bible, sins of omission are acts of disobedience just as serious as those which are committed. When God tells Christians to worship, speak, or act, and they refuse, they have disobeyed, end quote. So my point is, failure to vote against abortion is a sin of omission. You have not acted against abortion, and certainly if you vote Democrat, that seems to be, relative to abortion, a sin of commission. You have voted for the death of 20 million black babies. You have voted for the elimination of 1/3 of the U.S. black population. Well, there you go. Black Lives Matter. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist, where our slogan is, fear not, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.